In March 2012, the body of 28-year-old Rachel Barnes was discovered during renovations at Faithstone Ministries in Canyon, Texas. An investigation uncovered the horrifying double life of Reverend Samuel Grayson, a beloved preacher with a history of manipulation and murder. In April 2010, Grayson's relationship with music teacher Emily Parker marked the beginning of a chain of events that would lead to a shocking and bloody revelation. The Texas evening was warm, the kind of dry heat that clung to your skin. At a dimly lit gas station just outside Canyon, a woman stumbled in, barefoot and shaking. She was covered in dirt, her face streaked with tears, and her trembling hands clutched a cracked phone, as if it were the only thing keeping her alive. Her name was Emily Parker, a 35-year-old music teacher whose calm and structured life had been torn apart just hours earlier. Emily was known in the small town of Canyon for her gentle demeanor and passion for teaching. She worked at the local elementary school and was beloved by her students, who often left her thank you notes after class. Emily's life, though, had not been easy. In 2009, her husband left her, citing irreconcilable differences. It wasn't the divorce that shattered Emily. It was the loneliness that followed. She poured herself into her work, but by 2010, she found herself searching for solace. That's when she began attending Faithstone Ministries. Faithstone was a cornerstone of the Canyon community. Its leader, Reverend Samuel Grayson, was not just a preacher. He was a man of great influence. Grayson had the kind of charisma that could make anyone believe they were the center of his world. His sermons were powerful, often punctuated by his booming voice and commanding presence. But it wasn't just his preaching that drew people in. It was his kindness. He had a way of making everyone feel seen, and Emily was no exception. Emily first met Reverend Grayson after a Sunday service in the early 2011. She was sitting in the last pew, nervously clutching her hymnal, when he approached her. He offered her counseling, telling her it was his mission to help people in their times of need. For months, Emily attended one-on-one sessions with Grayson. At first, the meetings were innocent. He listened as she poured out her pain about her divorce and her struggles with self-worth. But over time, the nature of their sessions changed. Grayson began to show a side of himself that felt less pastoral and more personal. Emily didn't realize it then, but she was not the only woman receiving this kind of attention. Born in 1968, Samuel Grayson was raised in Canyon, Texas, the only child of Pastor William Grayson and his wife Eleanor. Samuel grew up surrounded by the rituals of the church, attending every service and absorbing his father's teachings. By 1986, Samuel had taken on leadership roles within Faithstone Ministries, often delivering sermons when his father was unwell. His father's death in 1992 left a void in the congregation, one that Samuel eagerly stepped in to fill. Under his leadership, Faithstone grew from a modest local church to a regional powerhouse. By the early 2000s, the church had over 1,000 members, a polished website, and regular appearances on local TV. To outsiders, Grayson was a man of faith, a widower raising his teenage daughter after his wife's death from cancer in 2005. But those close to him whispered about a darker side. Neighbors often commented on Grayson's strict demeanor. He rarely smiled off camera, and his relationships with women in the congregation raised eyebrows. Over the years, several women came forward to confide in each other about their unease. They spoke of Grayson's charm turning into control, of how he would insert himself into their personal lives under the guise of counseling. Grayson's sermons frequently focused on redemption, but his actions suggested he saw himself as more than just a guide. He had a pattern of targeting vulnerable women, those who had recently lost loved ones, gone through divorces, or experienced financial struggles. He would offer them help, a listening ear, and eventually, a place within his inner circle. One of those women was Rachel Barnes. Rachel was 28 years old, a single mother struggling to make ends meet after her husband left her in 2008. She had joined Faithstone Ministries in 2009, seeking support for her young son, Caleb. Rachel worked long hours as a waitress at a diner on Canyon's Main Street, often taking double shifts to pay for Caleb's daycare. Despite her hardships, Rachel was known for her warmth. She greeted every customer with a smile and never complained, even when her feet ached from hours of standing. By 2010, Rachel had become a regular attendee at Faithstone. Reverend Grayson quickly took notice of her. He would often single her out during services, asking the congregation to pray for her strength as a single mother. At first, Rachel was grateful. She felt seen, valued even, in a way she hadn't since her husband left. But as the months went on, Grayson's attention became more personal. He began visiting her at the diner, offering to pray with her during her breaks. He even gifted her Caleb's first tricycle, a gesture that Rachel found both kind and overwhelming. Emily Parker had been invited to Reverend Grayson's home for what he described as a quiet dinner to discuss a new charity initiative. She had been to his home before, a modest yet stately house on the outskirts of Canyon. But that evening, something felt different. The house was unusually dark, the air thick with tension. Emily noticed Rachel's car, parked in the driveway, and felt a pang of jealousy, though she couldn't explain why. Inside, Grayson greeted her warmly, but quickly excused himself, saying he needed to finish a private session in his study. He instructed Emily to wait in the living room, where the only sounds were the ticking of a grandfather clock and the muffled voices coming from down the hall. Curiosity got the better of her. Emily tiptoed toward the study and pressed her ear to the door. What she heard froze her in place. Rachel's voice, trembling, pleaded for Grayson to let her leave. His voice, calm but menacing, responded with words Emily couldn't make out. Then came a sudden crash, followed by a muffled scream. Emily's heart raced. She leaned closer, her hand trembling as she turned on the recording app on her phone. Through the crack of the door, she saw Grayson standing over Rachel, a knife in his hand. Blood pooled beneath Rachel as she gasped for breath. Emily's instincts screamed at her to run, but she forced herself to stay silent long enough to record the evidence she knew she would need. As soon as Grayson turned away, Emily bolted. She ran through the house, out the side door, and into the night. The uneven ground cut her feet, but she didn't stop. By the time she reached the gas station 3 miles away, her body was shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion. Her only lifeline was the recording on her phone, and the hope that someone would believe her story. Emily Parker was not the kind of person you'd expect to find entangled in a secretive relationship with a man like Reverend Samuel Grayson. At 35, Emily was a respected music teacher in Canyon, Texas, loved for her quiet strength and dedication to her students. But by 2010, her life had taken a sharp turn. The divorce from her husband had left her not only emotionally fragile, but also deeply lonely. She sought solace in Faithstone Ministries, drawn to its reputation as a haven for those in need. Reverend Grayson had a way of finding people when they were at their lowest. He had a presence that was both commanding and comforting, a combination that made it easy for people like Emily to trust him. During their first counseling session, Emily opened up about her feelings of failure and hopelessness. Grayson had listened intently, his gaze steady, and assured her that pain was a temporary test of faith. His words felt like an anchor in the storm of her emotions. Over the next few months, their sessions became more frequent. Grayson made her feel special, always finding time for her, even when the demands of the church seemed overwhelming. He spoke about the burden of leadership and how only a few people could understand the pressure he faced. Emily felt a connection growing between them, one that blurred the lines between spiritual guidance and something more intimate. By the late 2010, their relationship had crossed that line. At first, Emily told herself it was love. Grayson was charming and attentive, making her feel seen in a way she hadn't for years. But as their affair deepened, cracks began to show in his carefully crafted facade. He started to question her every move, growing jealous when she spent time with friends or mentioned casual conversations with male colleagues. He called it protective concern, but Emily felt the weight of his control tightening around her life. Still, she convinced herself that his intensity was a sign of his love. Unbeknownst to Emily, Grayson had another side she was only beginning to glimpse. While Emily was falling deeper into Grayson's orbit, another woman was being drawn in. Rachel Barnes, 28, was a single mother working tirelessly to support her young son, Caleb. Her struggles with childcare, long hours as a waitress, and financial instability made her vulnerable. She had been attending Faithstone Ministries since 2009, seeking hope in her faith. Grayson noticed her immediately. By 2011, Rachel had become a regular fixture at Grayson's private counseling sessions. To the congregation, her relationship with him seemed like that of a mentor and a mentee. But Emily began to notice subtle changes. She saw how Grayson's eyes lingered on Rachel during services, and how Rachel, once a reserved woman, seemed more withdrawn after their meetings. Emily started to feel uneasy, but dismissed her feelings as jealousy. It wasn't until early 2012 that Emily began to piece things together. Grayson's behavior had grown more erratic. He became more secretive, often disappearing for hours without explanation. When Emily questioned him, he would deflect, accusing her of mistrust. Determined to understand what was happening, Emily started keeping a journal. She noted the times Grayson mentioned Rachel, the overlaps in their schedules, and the cryptic remarks he made about helping those who need saving. Emily arrived at Grayson's home that evening expecting a quiet dinner. He had described it as a chance for them to reconnect after what he called the distractions of recent weeks. But the moment she stepped through the door, she sensed something was wrong. The house, usually filled with the sound of soft gospel music or the hum of activity, was silent. Even the air felt heavy, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Grayson greeted her at the door, his smile unusually tight. He mentioned a private spiritual session he was conducting in his study and asked Emily to wait in the living room. His tone was calm, almost casual, but something about his demeanor unsettled her. As he disappeared down the hall, she noticed his shirt cuff was stained, a small smudge of what looked like blood. Emily sat on the edge of the couch, her heart pounding. She tried to focus on the ornate decor of the room, the framed scripture verses and polished wooden crosses, but her unease grew with each passing minute. From down the hall, she heard muffled voices. One was Grayson's, his tone low and deliberate. The other was a woman's, Rachel's. Her voice was shaky, tinged with fear. Compelled by a mix of curiosity and dread, Emily rose from the couch. She walked quietly toward the study, her bare feet making no sound on the hardwood floor. As she approached the door, the voices grew clearer. Rachel was pleading, her words coming out in bursts of desperation. Grayson's replies were calm, almost soothing, but there was a sharpness beneath the surface that made Emily's stomach twist. Through the small gap in the door, Emily saw the scene unfold. Rachel was on her knees, her hands clasped as if in prayer. Grayson stood over her, his face expressionless, a knife glinting in his hand. Emily froze, her breath caught in her throat. Grayson moved swiftly, bringing the knife down in a blur of motion. Rachel's screams were muffled as he covered her mouth with his free hand. Emily wanted to scream, to run, but her body refused to move. Her mind raced with thoughts of what to do. She fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. She managed to activate the recording app, capturing the sounds of Rachel's muffled cries and Grayson's chilling words. When Rachel fell silent, Emily knew she couldn't stay. She turned and ran, her feet barely touching the ground as she bolted through the side door. The cool night air hit her like a shock, but she didn't stop. She ran through the darkness, her bare feet scraping against gravel and sharp twigs. Every sound behind her felt like Grayson's footsteps chasing her down. When Emily finally reached the gas station 3 miles away, her legs gave out beneath her. The clerk, startled by her appearance, rushed to help. Emily thrust her phone at him, her voice barely a whisper, as she tried to explain what had happened. The police arrived within minutes, their flashing lights illuminating her bloodied hands and tear-streaked face. March 7th, 2012, the Canyon Sheriff's Department, prompted by Emily Parker's frantic testimony and her recording, dispatched officers to Reverend Samuel Grayson's home early that morning. The house stood calm and unassuming, its modest facade betraying nothing of the horrors Emily claimed had occurred inside. Grayson himself greeted the officers at the door, his demeanor unshaken. He was dressed neatly, his hair combed back, and his voice carried a practiced calmness. The officers requested to inspect the property. Grayson stepped aside, inviting them in with an air of confidence that unnerved even the most seasoned deputies. He spoke with a measured tone, denying all allegations and insisting that Rachel Barnes had left for a spiritual retreat the previous evening. He even presented a series of text messages from Rachel's phone, seemingly corroborating his story. These texts painted a picture of a woman seeking solitude in clarity, asking for prayers during her absence. Inside the house, the study that Emily had described in vivid detail appeared pristine. There was no sign of a struggle, no blood, no misplaced furniture. The thick wooden desk was spotless, and the faint scent of lemon polish lingered in the air. Grayson explained away Emily's claims as the delusions of a bitter former lover, suggesting that her emotions had clouded her judgment. His confidence was disarming, and for a moment, even the officers doubted the severity of Emily's accusations. Emily's credibility came under scrutiny. The deputies noted her admitted affair with Grayson, a detail Grayson emphasized during questioning. To an outsider, her story could easily appear as a desperate attempt to smear the reputation of a beloved community leader. However, the recording on Emily's phone kept the investigation alive. While the audio was muffled and incomplete, it captured Rachel's panicked voice and Grayson's cold, chilling tone. The sheriff's department could not dismiss the case outright. March 8, 2012. The investigation stalled almost immediately. A thorough search of Grayson's home yielded no evidence to support Emily's claims. Forensic teams combed the property for days, focusing on the study where the alleged attack occurred. But the room was meticulously clean. Not a single trace of blood or physical struggle was found. Grayson's composure during these searches only bolstered his defense. He cooperated fully, offering access to every corner of his home and maintaining a calm, righteous facade. Meanwhile, Grayson's influence over the community came into full force. Faith Stone Ministries became a hub of support for the preacher. Congregants rallied around him, organizing prayer vigils and flooding social media with posts defending his character. They described him as a man of unwavering faith, someone who had guided their families through crises and inspired them with his sermons. To these loyal followers, Emily Parker was an outsider, an unstable woman trying to destroy a good man's reputation. Emily faced a harsh backlash. Church members whispered about her in grocery store aisles, and her once friendly neighbors turned cold. Parents at the school where she taught questioned her ability to be a role model for their children. Emily's world began to crumble under the weight of public scrutiny. She had risked everything by coming forward, yet the very community she sought to protect had turned against her. Despite the isolation and fear, Emily clung to the hope that justice would prevail. Unbeknownst to the investigators, Grayson had secrets hidden in the depths of his home. Beneath the foundation, concealed behind a reinforced trapdoor in the basement, lay a hidden room. The room was a macabre vault of Grayson's darkest secrets. Quicklime barrels sat in one corner, evidence of his methodical approach to disposing of his victims. The walls were lined with shelves containing letters, jewelry, and personal items belonging to women who had disappeared over the years. Polaroid photographs documenting his crimes were carefully organized and stored in a locked chest. Rachel's body had been dealt with swiftly. Grayson, knowing the risks of being caught, had used the quicklime to destroy any trace of her remains. He had spent the night meticulously cleaning the study and crafting his alibi. His years of manipulation and careful planning had prepared him for moments like this. The facade he wore in public was unshakable, and his hidden crimes were buried so deeply that even the most diligent investigators had no reason to suspect them. March 20th, 2012. The investigation took an unexpected turn when a construction crew, working on renovations at Faith Stone Ministries, stumbled upon human remains buried beneath the church's foundation. The discovery was accidental. The workers had been digging to reinforce the building's structural integrity when they uncovered a shallow grave. Dental records confirmed the remains belonged to Patricia Lane, a woman who had disappeared in 2007 after attending one of Grayson's women's retreats. Patricia's disappearance had been a mystery for years. She was a bright and ambitious 32-year-old who had joined Faithstone Ministries, seeking guidance during a difficult time in her life. Her sudden vanishing had left her family devastated and baffled. At the time, authorities had no evidence to link her to foul play, and the case went cold. The discovery of her remains shattered the illusion of Faithstone as a sanctuary of hope. The discovery opened a floodgate of questions. Investigators began to re-examine other missing persons cases connected to the church. Financial records from Faithstone Ministries revealed large cash withdrawals and unreported donations spanning over a decade. These funds, investigators suspected, were used to fund Grayson's lavish lifestyle and to cover up his crimes. Grayson's carefully maintained image began to crack as the evidence against him grew. The community, once so steadfast in its support of Grayson, began to waver. Doubt spread like wildfire as people questioned the man they had revered for years. Emily Parker, though still ostracized by many, felt a glimmer of vindication as the truth about Grayson's sinister activities began to surface. The discovery of Patricia Lane's remains marked the beginning of Grayson's downfall. For years, he had managed to stay ahead of suspicion, hiding his crimes behind his position of power. But the unearthing of Patricia's grave was a chilling reminder that no secret could stay buried forever. Investigators were now closer than ever to uncovering the full extent of his monstrous deeds. April 5th, 2012. It was a bright Sunday morning, and the congregation at Faithstone Ministries gathered as they did every week. Families filled the pews, exchanging warm greetings and smiles, their Bibles clutched tightly as they prepared to hear another powerful sermon from Reverend Samuel Grayson. The choir sang hymns that echoed through the sanctuary, and sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns on the floor. For many, this was a sacred ritual, a moment of peace in their busy lives. Grayson stood at the pulpit, commanding attention with his usual calm authority. He wore his signature black suit and carried the same worn Bible he had preached from for years. His voice, steady and reassuring, filled the room as he began his sermon. The congregation hung on his every word, unaware of the storm brewing just outside the church doors. At 10:45 a.m., the double doors of the sanctuary burst open. The sound of boots against the tiled floor echoed through the room, silencing the congregation mid-hymn. Members of the Canyon Sheriff's Department entered, led by Detective Mark Caldwell, a no-nonsense investigator who had spent weeks piecing together Grayson's crimes. The congregation gasped as the officers walked purposefully down the aisle toward the pulpit. Grayson did not flinch. He closed his Bible with a deliberate calm, his expression serene, as if he had been expecting this moment. The officers announced the charges: multiple counts of murder, abuse, and embezzlement. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the pews as parishioners struggled to process what they were hearing. Some began to cry, clutching one another for support, while others stared in stunned silence. Grayson raised his hands, allowing the deputies to handcuff him without resistance. His eyes scanned the room, his calm demeanor unnerving as he maintained a faint smile. As the officers escorted him down the aisle, Grayson turned to the reporters gathered outside the church. Flash bulbs lit up the scene as cameras captured every moment. He spoke briefly, declaring his innocence and insisting that he was being persecuted. His words sent a chill through those watching. To his most loyal followers, this was a test of faith. To others, it was the first crack in the image of the man they once revered. The moment was surreal for Emily Parker, who watched the events unfold from a safe distance. She had fought tirelessly to bring Grayson to justice, and now, seeing him in handcuffs, she felt a complex mix of relief, anger, and lingering fear. It was a victory, but it came at a cost. The trial of Reverend Samuel Grayson began on August 12, 2012, in the Canyon County Courthouse. The case had drawn national attention, with media outlets dubbing him the pulpit predator. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse daily, holding signs that ranged from messages of support to demands for justice. For weeks, the community had been split between those who believed in Grayson's innocence and those who were horrified by the revelations of his crimes. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Linda Harper, meticulously laid out the evidence. Harper, a seasoned attorney known for her sharp wit and determination, began by introducing the chilling discovery of Patricia Lane's remains beneath the church foundation. Dental records and forensic analysis left no doubt about the identity of the victim, linking her death directly to Grayson. Harper then presented Emily Parker's audio recordings, the most damning pieces of evidence in the case. The courtroom listened in silence as the muffled sounds of Rachel Barnes's desperate pleas and Grayson's cold responses filled the room. The recordings painted a vivid picture of the preacher's brutality, leaving many in the audience visibly shaken. The contents of Grayson's hidden vault were also revealed. Photographs, letters, and personal belongings from multiple victims were displayed as evidence. The jury was shown the Polaroids in a carefully controlled manner, each image a haunting reminder of the lives Grayson had destroyed. The prosecution argued that these items were trophies, kept as sick mementos of his crimes. Testimonies from survivors added another layer of horror to the trial. Women who had once been part of Grayson's congregation recounted how he manipulated and controlled them under the guise of spiritual counseling. One by one, they described how he preyed on their vulnerabilities, isolating them from their families and using fear to maintain his power. The accounts were heartbreaking, each story a testament to the depth of his depravity. Emily Parker became the star witness. Her testimony detailed her relationship with Grayson, the gradual erosion of her trust, and the night she witnessed Rachel Barnes's murder. She spoke of the fear that gripped her as she recorded the scene, the desperation that drove her to run barefoot through the dark Texas night, and the isolation she endured after coming forward. Emily's courage in facing Grayson in court was evident, and her words left a profound impact on the jury. Throughout the trial, Grayson maintained his composure. He sat at the defense table, flanked by his attorneys, his expression unreadable. His legal team argued that the evidence was circumstantial and that Emily's testimony was motivated by jealousy and revenge. They suggested that the items in the vault were planted, a conspiracy to tarnish a man of God. But the weight of the evidence was undeniable. September 24th, 2012. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for just 4 hours. The verdict was unanimous, guilty, on all counts. The courtroom erupted in a mix of gasps and muffled cheers as the judge delivered the sentence: life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the first time, Grayson's composure faltered. His faint smile disappeared, replaced by a cold, hard stare as he was led out of the courtroom. For Emily Parker and the other survivors, the verdict marked the end of a long and harrowing journey. It was a victory, but one that could never erase the scars left by Grayson's crimes. Faith Stone Ministries, once a symbol of hope for so many, was left in ruins, its congregation scattered, and its legacy forever tainted. The trial revealed the horrifying extent of Grayson's manipulation and abuse, exposing the darkness that had lurked behind his righteous facade for over a decade. It was a chilling reminder of how power and charisma could be weaponized, and how even the most trusted figures could harbor unimaginable secrets. After a 6-week trial, Grayson is found guilty of multiple counts of murder, fraud, and abuse. He is sentenced to life without parole, his fall from grace shocking the nation. Emily Parker moves out of Canyon, starting a new life but haunted by the memories of her near-death experience. Faith Stone Ministries dissolves, leaving its followers grappling with the betrayal of the man they once idolized. Grayson's case remains one of the darkest chapters in Texas history, a chilling reminder of the evil that can hide behind a mask of righteousness. Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay updated on our daily true crime stories. If you thought this case was shocking, you won't believe a Catholic priest affair with an illegal immigrant that took a bloody turn. Check it out and share your thoughts in the comments below. In January 2014, the body of 18-year-old Heather Malone was found in the living room of a suburban home in Brookhaven, Georgia. An investigation uncovered the disturbing details of her obsessive relationship with high school coach Nathan Ellis. Beginning in the fall of 2013 at Brookhaven High School, a series of events unfolded that would spiral into jealousy, betrayal, and ultimately a night of devastating violence. Nathan Ellis had always been the kind of man people gravitated toward. At just 28 years old, his charm and natural ability to connect with others made him a perfect fit for his role as the new basketball coach at Brookhaven High School. His players admired him, not just for his skills, but for how he seemed to truly care about their development on and off the court. Nathan wasn't just their coach, he was their mentor, a figure they could look up to. Nathan's personal life seemed just as perfect as his professional one. He had recently married Hannah, his college sweetheart, in a beautiful ceremony on the April 14th, 2012. Hannah was a kindergarten teacher, known throughout the town for her gentle demeanor and her love for children. Together, they had just moved into a cozy 3-bedroom house on the edge of Brookhaven. The house wasn't large, but it was full of possibilities: space for a nursery, a backyard for a swing set, and a future filled with the kind of love and warmth that Nathan and Hannah dreamed of. For Nathan, the transition to married life was both exciting and challenging. Balancing the demands of his new job and his commitment to Hannah required more energy than he had anticipated. Hannah, ever supportive, encouraged him to pour his passion into his coaching, assuring him that they would always find time for each other. They spent weekends decorating their home and talking about their plans for the future. Hannah even started collecting baby names, carefully jotting them down in a small notebook she kept by the bed. Heather Malone, meanwhile, was living a very different life. At 17 years old, she was the star cheerleader of Brookhaven High School. Her stunning looks and outgoing personality made her the center of attention wherever she went. But behind her radiant smile was a girl desperate for love and stability. Heather had grown up in a broken home with parents who were more interested in their own arguments than in raising their daughter. Her father had left when she was 10, and her mother, battling alcoholism, barely managed to keep their small apartment livable. Heather had learned early on how to fend for herself. The instability at home shaped Heather into a master manipulator. She knew how to use her beauty and charm to get what she wanted, and she wasn't afraid to push boundaries to escape the chaos of her personal life. Despite her popularity at school, Heather carried a deep sense of insecurity. She longed for someone to see beyond her exterior, someone who would provide her with the love and validation she never received at home. Nathan became that someone. It started innocently enough. It was at September 2012, and Nathan had been at Brookhaven High for just a few months. Heather often stayed late after cheerleading practice, lingering near the gym to watch the basketball team. At first, it was just a harmless crush. She admired how confident Nathan was, how he commanded respect from his players while maintaining a sense of approachability. To Heather, he wasn't just a coach. He was the kind of man she imagined could save her from the life she desperately wanted to leave behind. For Nathan, Heather's attention was flattering. He was adjusting to his new role as a husband and a coach, but the pressures of both were starting to weigh on him. The late nights spent reviewing game strategies often meant less time with Hannah, who was busy managing her classroom of energetic 5-year-olds. When Heather began complimenting him, praising his coaching skills, or commenting on his leadership, Nathan felt a sense of validation he hadn't realized he craved. By October 2012, their interactions had become more frequent. Heather found reasons to talk to Nathan after practice, sometimes asking for advice about school, or claiming she needed help with her cheer routines. Nathan, caught off guard by her attention, but unwilling to be rude, always obliged. Their conversations were initially lighthearted, but over time, they became more personal. Heather spoke about her struggles at home, how she often felt like no one cared about her, how she longed for a better life. Nathan, with his natural tendency to mentor and support, found himself feeling protective of her. One evening in late October, after a particularly grueling practice, Nathan stayed late in his office to finish some paperwork. Heather knocked on the door, claiming she had left her phone in the gym. When she entered, she thanked him for always being so kind to her. Heather spoke about how much she admired him, not just as a coach, but as a person. She told him he was the only adult who seemed to truly care about her. For Nathan, the moment was emotionally complicated. He saw Heather as a troubled young woman looking for guidance, but the intensity of her words made him feel something he wasn't ready to acknowledge. the line between teacher and student began to blur. And Nathan, though hesitant, didn't stop it from happening. By November 2012, their meetings had become more frequent. What started as casual conversations in the gym turned into private moments in Nathan's office after hours. Heather, emboldened by Nathan's initial kindness, began to push boundaries. She dressed more provocatively during practices, ensuring she caught his attention. Nathan, battling a growing sense of guilt, tried to rationalize their interactions. He told himself he was simply being a mentor, a source of stability in Heather's chaotic life. But Heather wanted more. She craved Nathan's attention and grew frustrated when he tried to keep their relationship professional. She began testing him, lingering longer after practice, accidentally brushing against him during conversations, and finding excuses to text him outside of school hours. Heather knew how to exploit Nathan's vulnerabilities, and she used every tool at her disposal to pull him closer. By December 2012, their relationship had crossed the line. Late one evening, after a home game, Nathan found himself alone in the gym with Heather. The tension that had been building between them finally erupted. In the quiet of the empty gym, with only the faint hum of the overhead lights, they shared their first intimate moment. Nathan, overwhelmed by a mix of desire and guilt, knew he had made a terrible mistake. But the connection they shared was undeniable, and Heather wasn't about to let him go. Their affair became a carefully guarded secret. They met late at night in Nathan's office or under the bleachers, when they were sure no one else was around. Heather was careful to maintain her image at school, but her obsession with Nathan grew stronger with each passing day. For Nathan, the affair became a source of constant inner turmoil. He loved his wife and hated himself for betraying her, but he couldn't seem to extricate himself from Heather's grasp. By January 2013, the cracks in their secret began to show. Heather grew increasingly possessive, often texting Nathan late at night and demanding his attention. She would ask probing questions about his marriage, fishing for signs that he was unhappy with Hannah. Nathan, trying to salvage what remained of his conscience, began to pull away, but Heather wouldn't allow it. For her, the affair wasn't just a fling, it was her lifeline, her escape from a life she despised. Heather's obsession reached a breaking point when she noticed Hannah attending more of Nathan's games. The way he smiled at his wife, the pride he showed when introducing her to his players, drove Heather into a jealous rage. She couldn't stand the thought of Nathan giving Hannah the love and attention she believed should be hers. The stage was set for a confrontation that would forever change their lives. What began as a reckless indulgence had become a dangerous entanglement, one that neither Nathan nor Heather could control. What would Heather do next? And how far would she go to keep Nathan by her side? By July 2013, life for Nathan and Hannah Ellis seemed picture perfect to the outside world. They were a young, beautiful couple with a promising future. Hannah, who had always been the backbone of their relationship, exuded grace and positivity. Despite Nathan's long hours as a basketball coach, she made it a point to attend every game she could, her growing belly a proud sign of the life they were building together. But underneath the smiles and loving gestures, Nathan carried a burden that grew heavier with each passing day. His affair with Heather had spiraled out of control, morphing from a reckless mistake into a source of constant fear and anxiety. Heather's obsession had become relentless. Her once flirtatious texts were now desperate messages demanding his attention. She would show up unannounced at the gym, waiting for him after practice, her eyes burning with a mix of anger and longing. Heather's world revolved entirely around Nathan. Her obsession consumed her, fueled by the emptiness of her own life. She had no family to turn to, no true friends to confide in. Her grades began to slip, and her attendance at cheerleading practice became erratic. Heather's coach grew concerned, but Heather brushed off the questions with vague excuses. Behind closed doors, however, Heather's jealousy of Hannah had reached a fever pitch. On August the 14th, 2013, everything changed. During a game at Brookhaven High, Hannah made an unexpected appearance. She wore a loose-fitting dress that barely concealed her growing baby bump. Nathan spotted her in the stands and couldn't help the smile that spread across his face. To him, Hannah was a beacon of light in his dark and complicated world. Heather, standing on the sidelines in her cheerleading uniform, saw the exchange and felt a surge of uncontrollable rage. Heather couldn't comprehend how Nathan could still love his wife when she had risked everything for him. She hated the way his face lit up for Hannah, the way his gaze lingered on her, even as he coached the game. That night, when Hannah approached Nathan to congratulate him after the game, Heather stood in the shadows, watching them with a clenched jaw and trembling hands. The announcement of Hannah's pregnancy, made casually to a group of players and their families after the game, was the final blow. Heather left the gym abruptly, slamming the door behind her as she fought back tears. To her, the pregnancy was a betrayal, a permanent symbol of Nathan's love for his wife and the life he was building without her. From that moment on, Heather's thoughts became consumed with one goal: removing Hannah from the picture. Nathan, oblivious to the storm brewing in Heather's mind, decided it was time to end the affair once and for all. On the August 20th, 2013, after a late practice, he called Heather into his office. What he intended to be a final conversation quickly turned into a volatile confrontation. Heather begged, threatened, and cried, alternating between declaring her love for him and warning him about what she could do if he left her. Nathan remained firm, walking away from her sobs echoing in the empty gym. By November 1st, 2013, Heather's obsession had reached dangerous new heights. Nathan had stopped responding to her texts and avoided her as much as possible. Her carefully constructed world of manipulation and control was crumbling, and she was determined to reclaim the power she felt slipping through her fingers. That rainy afternoon, Heather drove to the Ellis household. She knew Nathan wouldn't be home. He was at the school preparing for an upcoming tournament. Heather had no real plan, only the determination to see Hannah face to face. As she pulled into the driveway, her mind raced with possibilities. If she could just talk to Hannah, maybe she could scare her enough to make her leave Nathan. Or perhaps she could find something, anything, that would give her leverage over them. Hannah, ever the gracious hostess, answered the door with a warm smile despite the rain. She didn't know Heather well, but recognized her from the cheerleading team. Heather feigned politeness, claiming she had forgotten her jacket in Nathan's car and needed to ask him something. Hannah, not suspecting anything, invited her inside and offered her a glass of water. Heather accepted, her eyes darting around the house as she stepped into the kitchen. It was then that Heather noticed the cup of tea sitting on the counter. Hannah had been drinking it earlier while tidying up. The idea struck Heather like lightning. She had no real plan, but the opportunity seemed too perfect to pass up. As Hannah turned her back to retrieve the water, Heather slipped a small vial of poison she had hidden in her bag into the tea. Her hands trembled as she poured the liquid, her heart racing at the thought of what she was about to do. Heather didn't stick around long. She thanked Hannah and left, her heart pounding as she walked back to her car. She told herself it was just enough poison to make Hannah sick, to scare her into leaving Nathan. But deep down, she wanted more. She wanted to erase Hannah from Nathan's life entirely. Later that evening, Hannah began to feel unwell. At first, it was just a dull ache in her stomach, but by midnight, the pain had become unbearable. Nathan rushed her to the hospital, panic etched across his face. The doctors worked quickly, but the damage was done. Hannah had suffered a miscarriage, and the baby they had dreamed of was gone. Nathan was devastated, but his grief quickly turned to suspicion. Something about the timing felt off. Heather had been at the house earlier that day, uninvited, unexpected. The thought gnawed at him, but he had no proof. When he confronted Heather the next day, she denied everything, her expression cold and unyielding. She warned him that he hadn't seen what she was truly capable of. Nathan didn't know how to protect his wife from the growing storm, but he knew one thing for certain: Heather wasn't going to let go without a fight. By January 2014, the lives of Nathan, Hannah, and Heather were already in shambles, though the world around them remained oblivious. Heather's obsession had reached its breaking point. Her once charming and flirtatious demeanor had become erratic and unhinged. At her 18 years old, Heather had become consumed by her fixation on Nathan, seeing him not as a person, but as a possession, a life raft in the storm of her broken world. She felt betrayed, not only by Nathan's rejection, but by Hannah's continued presence in his life, a presence that symbolized everything Heather believed she could never have. Nathan, meanwhile, was living in constant fear. He had distanced himself as much as he could from Heather after the poisoning incident, but knew deep down that she was a threat. He hadn't told Hannah the full extent of the affair, trying to shield her from the worst of it, but the guilt weighed heavily on him. Nathan had grown quieter, more withdrawn. He threw himself into his coaching, often taking on extra practices or games to avoid facing the crumbling remains of his personal life. Hannah, still recovering from the loss of their baby, noticed the distance but attributed it to grief. By early January, she had begun to rebuild herself emotionally, leaning on her parents and close friends for support. She spent her days preparing their home for a fresh start, hoping the arrival of spring might bring a sense of renewal. She was determined to repair her marriage, unaware of the true depth of Nathan's betrayal or the danger lurking in the shadows. Heather, however, could not move on. For her, the months following the poisoning had been a blur of rage and despair. She spent hours scrolling through Nathan's social media, analyzing every post and photo for signs of happiness with Hannah, The sight of the couple together fueled her growing hatred. By January 10th, 2014, Heather made a decision. If she couldn't have Nathan, no one could. On the evening of January 15th, 2014, Heather put her plan into action. She knew Nathan would be away coaching an away game, leaving the house empty except for Hannah. Armed with a handgun she had stolen from her stepfather months earlier, Heather drove to the Ellis home. The neighborhood was quiet, the streetlights casting long shadows over the suburban lawns. She parked a few houses down and walked the rest of the way, the cold air biting at her skin as she rehearsed what she would say to Hannah. Breaking into the house was easier than Heather had anticipated. The back door had been left unlocked, a mistake Hannah often made in her small, trusting community. Inside, the house was warm and still, a stark contrast to Heather's chaotic mind. She wandered through the living room, her fingers brushing over picture frames on the mantel. Each photo of Nathan and Hannah smiling together only deepened her resolve. Heather didn't have to wait long. At around 8:45 p.m., Hannah returned home, her arms full of groceries. She was startled to find Heather sitting in the living room, but her natural politeness kept her from reacting harshly. Heather's calm exterior quickly dissolved into anger, and she began accusing Hannah of ruining her life. Hannah was confused and scared, but she tried to reason with Heather, keeping her voice steady as she backed toward the kitchen. Heather followed, pulling the gun from her jacket. The sight of the weapon changed everything. Hannah's fear became palpable, but she kept her composure. She knew she needed help, and, thinking quickly, reached for her phone on the counter. Pretending to fumble with it, she managed to dial 911 and whisper her address before Heather realized what she was doing. When Heather heard the faint voice of the dispatcher on the other end of the line, her panic erupted. She grabbed Hannah by the arm and pulled her into the living room, yelling at her to sit down. Hannah complied, her heart racing as she tried to think of a way to escape. The minutes felt like hours as they waited for the inevitable arrival of the police. At 9:03 p.m., the sound of sirens filled the air. Heather's desperation turned to fury. She accused Hannah of calling the police, waving the gun erratically as she paced the room. When the first police car pulled into the driveway, Heather's erratic behavior escalated. She fired a shot, grazing Hannah's shoulder. The pain was sharp and immediate, but Hannah used the chaos to crawl behind a couch, shielding herself as best she could. The police, hearing the gunshot, moved quickly. They shouted commands from outside, trying to negotiate with Heather, but she was beyond reasoning. Heather barricaded herself in the house, firing wildly at the officers. In the chaos, one officer was struck and killed, a 32-year-old father of two, whose life would also be claimed by this tragic night. By 9:20 p.m., the standoff reached its climax. The police stormed the house, their movements swift and decisive. Heather fired at them, her shots wild and panicked. The officers returned fire, and Heather was struck multiple times. She collapsed in the living room, her blood pooling on the hardwood floor, her obsession and rage extinguished in an instant. The events of January 15th, 2014, left the Brookhaven community in shock. The once quiet neighborhood became a crime scene, the flashing lights of police cars illuminating the tragedy that had unfolded. News of the murder spread quickly, and within hours, Nathan's affair with Heather was exposed. The revelation destroyed Nathan's reputation. Parents withdrew their children from his team, demanding his resignation. Though Nathan cooperated fully with the investigation, admitting his role in the events that led to the tragedy, the public viewed him as complicit. By February 2014, Nathan had resigned from his position and disappeared from public life, retreating to an unknown location to escape the scrutiny. Hannah survived her physical injuries but struggled to recover emotionally. By March 2014, she had moved back in with her parents, filing for divorce shortly after. The betrayal and trauma were too much for her to bear, and she could no longer see a future with Nathan. Her once bright outlook on life was dimmed, replaced by the weight of grief and betrayal. Heather's story became a cautionary tale. The media painted her as a troubled young woman, a victim of her circumstances, but also a perpetrator of unimaginable violence. Debates about mental health, accountability, and the ethics of relationships between teachers and students raged on. But for those who knew her, Heather remained a symbol of how unchecked obsession and despair could spiral into tragedy. The Ellis home, once filled with hope and promise, stood empty for months. The neighborhood eventually returned to its routine, but the memory of that night lingered, a chilling reminder of how lives could unravel in the wake of love, betrayal, and obsession. This harrowing chapter of Nathan, Hannah, and Heather's lives would forever serve as a testament to the devastating consequences of secrets and unbridled emotion. The tragic events in Brookhaven left a lasting impact on everyone involved. It was a story of love, betrayal, and the dangerous consequences of unchecked obsession. A once promising life ended, a family was torn apart, and a quiet town was forever changed by the secrets and lies lurking beneath its surface. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more gripping stories like this. And check out another shocking case where a housewife's secret affair with her cousin's teenage son takes a dark turn. Let us know what you think in the comments below.